Much. Let's bring in Albie Amankona, Conservative commentator, and Owen Jones, who is Guardian columnist. Hello to you both. I'm going to come to you first of all, Albie. Do you think, I can predict what your answer is going to be to this somewhat. You think, I'm guessing, we should all get behind Liz Truss and put party politics to one side because we are in a time of national crisis?
Yes, indeed, Tina. In the Alison Moyet song that you played us into, she said, let's be optimistic. If we all pull together, we'll never fall apart again. But on a serious note, Liz Truss was not my first choice for the Prime Minister of this country, but I and the rest of the Conservative Party have come to the decision that we have to get behind this Prime Minister to get us through the choppy waters that are ahead. She is going to reveal a potential £100 billion energy plan tomorrow, much more wide and far-reaching than Labour's plan. She wants to increase her economic growth to 2.5%, as the new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, mooted in the Financial Times over the weekend. She wants to reverse the national insurance rise, which is actually something which Labour supports. And in the long term, she wants to increase energy supply. I think the question is, what's not to like?
Yeah, Albie, it's a nice idea, everybody getting behind her. And we've heard the word unity and unifying a lot over the last few days. But, realistically, isn't she going to struggle to get Conservatives behind her? Most of her own MPs didn't want her.
No, I do not think she will struggle to get Conservative MPs behind her. I've not heard a single Conservative MP come out and say anything bad about Liz Truss. What we have to focus on now is delivering for the British people on energy, on housing, on the NHS, on growing the economy, so that we can really solve this crisis which we are in at the moment. And it requires grit and it requires unity. And I think the Conservative Party has that, and that Liz Truss also has that too. OK, let's speak to Owen now. Owen, thank you so much for joining the programme this lunchtime.
Great to hear from you. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Is it right that we all back Liz Truss so we can, as she puts it, ride out the storm?
Well, there's no reason that any of us should suddenly just unite behind a leader because there's a national emergency. You can end that debate very quickly with two words: Neville Chamberlain. He was Prime Minister during a far graver national emergency. We faced the prospect of being invaded by the Nazis. He wasn't good enough. He got booted out in the middle of World War II back in 1940. This is a national emergency, fortunately not as grave as what we faced back then. But the same approach applies to Liz Truss as it applied to Neville Chamberlain. If she's not good enough in the face of a national emergency, if she's got the wrong answers to the national emergency, then she shouldn't be Prime Minister. And actually, if we look at what, she's currently proposing, obviously the government's got to do something, given if they don't, 45 million people face being driven into fuel poverty. That's 2/3 of the population. Businesses would go bankrupt across the country. Societies, we know, it would probably go into meltdown fairly quickly. But the issue is, how is she paying for it? Now, we were told the whole basis of austerity is you don't saddle future generations with debt because of the choices that you make today. But that's what she's planning to do. The big energy companies are making £170 billion in excess profits. The money is there to support a vast programme which can support people in this national emergency to stop them being driven into poverty. But she's choosing not to do that. And do you know what? That puts her to the right of Margaret Thatcher.
But we don't know that yet, do we? Because we don't have the detail on this plan. And I thought maybe I'm wrong that we're not going to end up paying for it. It's not going to mean higher bills for us over the next 10, 20 years.
Hold on. What she said in PMQs today is she opposes windfall taxes. So how is she going to pay for the money that she's proposing to save people from being plunged into poverty? And the point I'm making there about her being more right-wing than Margaret Thatcher, in 1981, because the Conservative government hiked up interest rates, banks made vast excess profits. Do you know what Margaret Thatcher did in 1981? She imposed a windfall tax on the banks. Thatcher could do that in 1981. So why can't the same approach be applied under a Conservative government, under Liz Truss, with the energy companies who've also made excess profits, not because of anything they've done, not because they're entrepreneurial or full of innovation, but because of circumstances they have absolutely no control over.
But Owen,
we have the money and we can use it to save people from being plunged into poverty. She's choosing not to do so
all right,
because she's more right than Thatcher.
It sounds like, Owen, what you have a disagreement with Liz Truss on is not actually the energy package which she's mooted to be be revealing tomorrow, which is a £100 billion energy package to freeze energy bills for families and also support for businesses as well. It's an argument about where do we fund it from. So you're arguing in favour for a windfall tax, which I think is a fine argument to make. You make the correct assertion that Margaret Thatcher implemented one in 1981. Liz Truss says that she wants to pay for it by getting the economy back growing again, increasing the tax take and paying for it that way. So actually, you don't disagree with the policy that Liz Truss has come up with. You disagree with how it's funded. Is that right?
Hold on, Albie. Everybody with any basic common sense supporting people with their energy bills.
So you support Liz's policy?
Albie, Labour. I don't support Keir Starmer, but Keir Starmer came up with that policy weeks ago. So
do you
the idea
support the policy or not?
So you're both. Liz Truss. Hang on. So Liz Truss is essentially. Labour should be happy because this is a Labour idea: freezing energy bills.
Liz Truss has lifted Labour's idea. Let's be very clear, of a vast government programme to stop people being driven into energy poverty. But instead of Labour, who aren't going far enough, I agree with that, by the way, instead of Labour's approach of a windfall tax on the excess profits, £170 billion, she's instead not funding it based on what Albie's saying. She just thinks the money will be magicked out of thin air. Maybe it will. I actually, personally, I'm not a deficit or a debt fetishist. I think we can afford to increase the national debt and the deficit. I don't think countries go bankrupt.
Which is exactly what Liz Truss is planning. So it sounds like you actually support the policy that she's mooted to be announcing tomorrow.
Because she's either because she's a Conservative, she's either going to fund it by making future generations pay for it via tax revenues, or an energy mortgage where consumers have a levy on their bill for the next 20 years. That's what we're talking about. The issue is the money is there. The energy giants don't need £170 billion of excess profits. You can take £100 billion off those excess profits and you can invest it to stop people being driven into energy poverty. She's choosing not to do that because she's more right-wing than Margaret Thatcher.
Okay, all that detail we will get tomorrow. Albie, let's talk about national insurance, because her plans for reversing that NI rise will, by her own admission, benefit the more well-off, won't they? And she's unapologetic about that. The rich getting richer, I guess, will benefit everybody overall through growth.
Look, I don't think you can make the argument, as many people on the left at the time were making, that the national insurance rise is unfair. And then when a Conservative Prime Minister says she wants to reverse that national insurance rise, that it's unfair. Now, in terms of the reverse in the policy, mainly having an impact on higher taxpayers, well, yes, you would expect people that pay more tax, if a tax rise is being cancelled, to get more tax back. That is just basic maths. But ultimately, you can't have argued against the national insurance rise because it was unfair and then say reversing it is also unfair.
Owen, would you have been any more enthusiastic about Rishi Sunak if he'd won?
It was a choice between collar and plague, really, wasn't it? I mean, Rishi Sunak was extraordinary, his implosion, because he was the most popular politician in the country for a while, undeservedly. It's just because he was associated with a furlough scheme. Lots of other Western economies did the same, so he was associated with free cash. But actually, he was very bad at politics. Look, in the campaign, he boasted of taking money from poorer communities in favour of richer communities. He essentially suggested that people who speak about inconvenient facts of British history should be referred to counter-terrorism and counter-extremism authorities, the so-called PREVENT programme. I mean, he came up with absolutely ludicrous proposals. Look, the problem is it's the Conservative government. I mean, they've been in power for 12 years. All of them have presided over the longest squeeze in wages since the Battle of Waterloo. No other country in the industrialised world other than Greece suffered such a long squeeze in wages as this country. That's on Rishi Sunak. That's on Liz Truss. And that's on the whole lot of them. The reason this country is in such a mess, the reason we've had 12 years, even Liz Truss says we've had years of stagnant economic growth. She hasn't quite pointed out who's been in charge for the last 12 years, which would, I think, maybe point to the reasons why, but she's at least accepted we've had stagnant growth, even though, her own, by her own admission, she's essentially going to just double down on the policies that landed us in the mess in the first place.
All right, Albie, do you accept that part of the reason we're in the mess we're in is because of 12 years of Conservative leadership?
part of the reason why we are in the mess that we're in is because of 20 years of government failure on increasing supply in this country of energy, of labour, of housing, and solving the productivity problems that this economy has. And as far as I can remember, in 2008, it was Labour that was in power. So let's not be, sort of throwing water at each other. There have been failures on both sides of the House, but Liz Truss is determined to get us back on a growth footing, to go against the Treasury orthodoxy and get us to a 2.5% growth rate and deliver on the infrastructure this country needs to succeed. And yes, I think we should be getting behind her on that mission.
OK, let's leave it there. Albie Amankona, Owen Jones, thank you so much for joining us.